Let's get started. My name is Justin, and once again, I'm a songwriter, record producer. I'm the founder of MDIIO, which stands for Music Data Intelligence In and Out, and it is a platform that is designed to help all of us organize our music, find opportunities, and actually earn money. It's free to use, and we encourage everybody, if you're not signed up to MDIIO, just go to MDIIO.com, MDIIO.com, and sign up for free. What you're also going to notice is that's probably the most I'm going to pitch MDIIO today, besides the fact to say that I'm very proud of what we've built, and as a songwriter and a record producer, I'm pleased that we can give this to the community. It's something that's well needed, especially in these times when copyright becomes more and more confusing for people. So we're here to help. We're very responsive, and as I do every week, I will give you my personal MDIIO email address, which is jgray@MDIIO.com. So at any point, feel free to email me, and I'll try and be as responsive as possible. I want to jump right into it. Please allow me to introduce my two guests. I'm going to give, it's almost impossible not to have super long intros for these guys because they're just absolutely, incredible and true all-stars at their craft. I want to introduce, first of all, my friend, and these are both people that I work with also. They mix songs. In fact, Tony literally just last week, or maybe even earlier this week, sent me a mix that he did that he absolutely crushed. Please meet Tony Maserati, who is a world-renowned mixer, and as some of you know, plug-in guru, and probably most of you have his plugins. Most recently, he's mixed the Selena Gomez song "Rare" that's out on the radio, Gallant, Bryce Vine, Carly Rae Jepsen, Prince, Kehlani, Borns, Jason Mraz, Weezer, Tears for Fears. I haven't even discussed pretty much every Beyonce single, and of course Alicia Keys. And by the way, Google him because that is not an intro befitting of a man of his caliber. And next, I'm going to introduce my friend Bryan Maloof, who I actually met I think in kind of the mid-'90s when he was an A&R person at RCA Records and wanted to sign or he'd come up to Toronto to look at a band that I had produced. And that was the first time that we met, and we've carved out a tremendous friendship since then. He's gone on to run A&R departments and be vice president of A&R at Hollywood Records and Disney. But beyond that, he was always a mixing engineer, and he was very fortunate to be in the room with Michael Jackson when they were making Michael Jackson Bad, and he worked with Madonna and Dave Matthews and Seal and Everclear and Pink and Pearl Jam and Kid Rock and All Time Low and Queen and Lit and Celine Dion and Jonas Brothers, whatever. These guys are true veterans. Real pleasure to have you guys. So thank you so much, Tony. Thank you so much, Bryan.
That
Pleasure
to be here.
Thank you. So we'll start with Tony. Tony, feel free. Did anything else you wanted to add to your list of credits, or did I miss anything?
Gardner, weekend logger, and no, that's great. That was just great. Thanks.
Good. I'm available for any functions that you need to make profuse introductions. Bryan, I mean, again, where you have an interesting perspective is that you've been in a very unique position to sort of almost sit on both sides, because you've also A&R'd in the major label universe for years, almost your whole career, as you were also mixing records. So maybe, am I missing anything there that you feel like maybe you wanted to add to? And by the way, this is no time to be humble. Brag.
Well, I don't have much to brag about, but doing A&R and being a studio rat was enlightening, because I sort of was able to witness and participate in how people listen to music in, not such a relaxed manner, but more in a competitive frame of mind, and judging it for its impact and its ability to kind of jump out of the speakers and grab someone and make them pay attention. And that, I think, contributed towards, becoming a more aggressive mixer for me, I guess.
That's actually, you're really making a good point. This wasn't even sort of on my concept of questions, but I want to come back to you because you set it up. And then I'd like to have Tony approach us, and then maybe you sort of wrap it up. But when you guys are approaching a song, how well are you listening with your own ears? Are you listening in anticipation of how other people are going to hear it? How about like different ways that they're hearing it? Are these all things that you're considering as you're working on a song, Tony?
I am. I'm thinking about the genre. I'm thinking about, I mean, back in the day, I would be thinking about what radio station it was going to be on. Today, I might be thinking about what playlist, what songs are going to play before and after this particular track. So I want to make sure that the audience is going to continue to listen and not change the channel or pause or whatever or skip the track. So yeah, I'm paying close attention to what I think the audience's ears are tuned to for this particular track, and I bounce around a lot. I mean, I do Korean pop, I do all varieties of American pop, and so I do have to pay close attention to what's going on and what's coming up, what's bubbling under.
So in other words, the perspective that you're mixing from is not, let's say, sort of singularly selfish. It's sort of what you think is going to work best for the situation.
Yes. Yeah, definitely.
I mean, Bryan, you managed to be a part of sort of the front end. In other words, being in the studio as records are being put together, but then also hearing them on the back end as they're now hitting the radio. How aware of that sort of arc of the evolution of a song are you as you are sort of now just approaching the mix component?
Are you talking about like if I produced something and then went on to mix it?
Well, I just meant using your expertise over the years of having been on sort of at every stage within the evolutionary arc of a song. Now, today, how do you approach the aesthetic of your mix? Because by the way, I mean, I've worked with both of you guys. You have really extensive, incredible sounding speakers, and you have a really very pristine monitoring, setup that you can listen to. But for the most time, people are consuming these things on earbuds, on maybe just even through their speaker on their iPhone or through their computer. Like, how aware are you of how they consume your mix? I guess is the question.
I try not to think about that too much because that's a really frustrating, thought process. It's the one thing that we can't control is how people are listening. I do check my mixes on a variety of speakers. At some point, I don't know if you can see this. It's like one of those JBL tube kind of things that you kind of put up by the pool. That's about as lo-fi as I go. I don't really care what it sounds like on laptop speakers, but I do listen on headphones and I do listen on AirPods. So I'm trying to hear a variety of monitors. But the one thing I'm envious about film mixers is they know how loud people are going to listen to their mixes, and they know roughly the environment that their people are going to be in if they're in the theater, and they mix for that. We got to mix for the living room, the car, the earbuds. It's it's the weak link in our chain, really.
I actually this is actually kind of a funny story. I was working with an artist, and as both of you guys know, I only mix by default. It's not really my preference. I much prefer writing songs and producing songs. But I remember an artist. This literally happened, saying, I'm not really hearing the bottom end. I'm like, that's crazy. Like, both of you guys have received rough mixes for me to know that I'm certainly no stranger to bottom end. And I was like, that's crazy. And I remember saying, oh, how are you listening to it? And they're like, oh, I'm just on my iPhone speakers. I'm like,
they're great.
Okay. It's actually that kind of actually brings me to unintentionally brings me to my next question. It's like, both of you guys, are sort of, because you're in many ways at the last stage of the evolution of the creative process. How do you deal with? I mean, this Tony question first, right? Like, how do you deal with the cooks, the too many cooks in the kitchen component of your job?
Well, it's a difficult thing because if there's if there's a battle going on between different people, whether it's, I've gotten labels say to me, don't talk to the producers, just talk to us.
Yeah.
But then I get files that don't make any sense, so I have to talk to the producer. And I've also been on records where the members of the band dislike each other.
Right.
Those are rare and difficult situations that don't even need to be talked about. But I think I'm working on a record now where the artist is self-producing, female artist self-producing. She's amazing. She takes a lot of input from the band, because she has a live band that she records and then she edits and does that. And that's been difficult, not necessarily from the standpoint of her having one idea, them having another, or them influencing her ideas. It's been more difficult because when I work with you, Justin, you're a producer, you put everything together, you have a deep knowledge of mixing as well. When you give me comments, those comments are based in my world. You'll say, the kick isn't hitting hard enough. I needed to do something like this song, or I needed to do something like that, or the vocal needs a little more schmutz. You'll use words that mean nothing, but I'll know what you're saying based on our work together and a common knowledge of what we're trying to get across. What I'm finding with this particular project is the band, because they're not studio people, they're not in the studio every day working on mixes, it's a little more difficult for them to say the thing that they need to say. And then I've got to try to interpret 5 people's comment. And sometimes it just means turn the piano down when they're saying, I need more bass. It doesn't necessarily mean turn the bass up. It means, oh, the piano is taking up too much space. Or maybe it means that as you said, maybe they're listening in on their iPhone. And, so a lot of times what I try to do is get everybody in the same room. I try to bring them to my studio and get them to all communicate to me. And then I demonstrate what comments they're saying, so they can say, oh, no, that's not good. You were right. Or I can say, oh, that's a great idea. Let me take it one further. And I think that helps me a lot to get everybody in the room. The hardest bit is when I've got comments from people, around the world, and everybody's got a different comment, and they haven't even talked to each other. That's really
and you guys are both such good diplomats, I think, when it comes to that, and you understand sort of the diplomacy and the dynamics that have to sort of coexist between you, the artist, the label, all of us. I mean, this is a very sort of it's a very fine balance that we sort of all have to seem to manage at some point. Bryan, it's interesting. You brought up, Tony, you brought up the fact that you're making records, and you brought up other territories. Bryan, we've worked on stuff for China. We've worked on tons of stuff together. Do you approach the mix differently based on the territory, or the people that how the habits of the listeners will be based on sort of where the records are coming out? Does that make sense?
No, not at all.
No, hey, okay, interesting. Yeah. So you just want it to sound good.
Yeah, I just want it to sound good. I just try to make whatever's there sound good to me, and hopefully it sounds good to other people.
So let me jump into my sort of a question. I guess I'll share it with you, Bryan, first. So a lot of people, even myself included, not particularly by choice, a lot of people are producing and then they're mixing their songs, right? So my question to you is, if you're a producer that's also mixing your own song, are are you separating those two? In other words, are you sort of producing a song going, okay, now I'm going to mix it, or are you sort of mixing it as you're going, or is there like a defined moment where it becomes a mix and it's no longer a production? Do you know what I mean?
Right. I do know what you mean. And in today's workflow, I don't think that there's a defining line that goes, okay, I've just finished producing, now I'm mixing. I think you're mixing all along. And I think in fact the opposite. Don't get into a mindset wherein you say, okay, now it's time to mix, and you start, opening up all of your plugins and doing things that you think you're supposed to do because now it's mix time. Just let what you've done, rest on its own and try to get a great vocal sound. I mean, I get a lot of people's productions to mix that have done a really terrific job with preparing the tracks, and I oftentimes think, God, I don't think I can make that any better. But what I can try to make better is the way the vocal sits in those tracks. So I think that's probably the mistake most people make, is they try to do something special because it's time to mix. And I think that's difficult. I also think it's difficult to mix tracks that you've worked on yourself, generally speaking. Whenever I was a producer, I would never do both the engineering and the mixing, and sometimes neither,
Well, it's interesting because one of the reasons why I love working with both of you guys so much, and you guys are both so tremendously strong doing what you do, is, and I always think fun, and you guys are both very respectful, and I appreciate the kind words of saying that my mixes are good, and they're fine, they are fine, but what I love about both of you guys is you're sort of you're not afraid to inject your personality into the songs. Like, for me, when I know that I'm going to be sending a song to Tony, or I'm going to be sending a song to you, Bryan, I expect to hear your personality. Tony, where do you draw the line in the mixes that you receive? So, in other words, I know that whenever I send both of you guys stuff, you always like to hear the most recent mix that I've maybe shared with the artist, or I've shared with the label, or the A&R person, or whatever. How do you find the time or the space to inject your personality? Because both of you guys, when those mixes come back, they're so distinct, they're so distinctly yours, and I love that about you guys. So where do you draw the line between preserving the rough mix, but then also putting your personality into it?
I think that it depends. I definitely want to hear the reference mix, because whether it's the artist or the label or everyone involved in the project, if they're accepting your work, you've produced this thing, and they've brought it to me. By the time they bring it to me, they believe in this thing that you've created. And sometimes it's the vocal sound that made them all of a sudden say, boom, we're ready. Or it's, it's just the way you put together that reference. And generally, if I'm going to venture away from it, whether it be for a particular section or just overall concept wise, I'll want to speak to you, the producer, directly before I do any of that. And I'll run ideas by you more than I won't send it to the artist. I won't send it to the label, because I think that's a time for us and for the producer to say to me, I never liked the particular sound I got on this. Can you help me with that? Or, I think that this is 50% there, but I really need more help. But there are times when I get something and, there isn't, there's two things that I want to say to that. There isn't a lot of space to move because of the package that I've been given. In other words, it's been limited and maximized and compressed so much that, I've got to sort of deconstruct it to get more out of it, which I do quite often. But also there are times when, as Bryan said, I will say to the producer, "This is amazing. What would you like me to do?" And that does happen. But most of the time, I hear something, you've given me, and I think, oh, he's left a hole for me here. He's left room for me here. I've got some transitions to work out, and then you and I can have a back and forth before we send it to the artist or the label. And usually that's the case with a pro like yourself.
My mother's listening. My mother's listening. My mother's listening. Can you say pro like yourself a little bit with a little bit more authority? That but look, you guys both talked about something, and I'd like to sort of approach this because, by the way, on this recent one, I remember that my response was, "Oh my God, you figured out the bottom end that I was having a challenge with the whole time."
Yeah.
It's like, and it was like, it's funny. There's the next question. I'll start with Tony, and then we'll bounce it over to Bryan. You guys both specifically mentioned vocals, and obviously, I always refer to vocals as the centerpiece. But when you're approaching a mix, I think there's a lot of people that sort of approach it different ways. I think people that are maybe, especially people that are producing their own songs and also mixing their own songs, and I used to suffer from this mistake early in my career, is that we were so precious about every little beep and boop that we put into the record that we sort of lost a track of the point, right? And so when you're approaching your mix, Tony, like, what is the first thing that you're listening for? And then how do you sort of build around that?
That's a really good point. I quite often will spend a fair bit of time just trying to get, to make sure that I find the elements that are exemplifying the lyric and the sentiment, right? That's really what I'm looking for. And then I'm going to accent those, or I'm going to build those to the moment that the point needs to be, reinforced, whether in the lyric or the vocal performance. So I'm always spending time doing that, and I'm always I try to spend as little time, noodling on the kick drum or the snare drum or something like that, and really trying to spend as little time as possible in solo, and much more time listening to this thing as a whole and never stopping it, letting it keep looping. And if I'm working on an EQ or something and the section changes, it's like, okay, well, I got to wait for the section to come back before I can touch
really? That. That's interesting. I really I never. So in other words, you're not sort of like sub-compartmentalizing each section and obsessing. You're really trying to just listen over and over again and understand the experience from a listener's perspective. Oh, that's very interesting.
I want to make sure that the track, because as I'm listening, I'm coming up with ideas, and then it's better to formulate the ideas in my head first, so that if the section changes and that either that instrument stops playing or it changes texture, I should have that idea already in my head. I don't need to worry about it. I can wait for the next pre-chorus and get back to that EQ. Do you know what I mean? I don't need to stop and focus on that. I've already got the idea in my head.
You're almost mixing live on the fly. That's really interesting. I never really looked at it that way.
I prefer to do that. I have to be honest, there's probably 30% of my day getting in there and saying, okay, I need more headroom. How can I get it? Well, I've got to start doing subtractive equalization to get more headroom in the track, or I might clip gain things down a dB or two so I get more headroom in my mix bus or my subgroups, that sort of thing. So there's a lot of that sort of nitty gritty work to do, but for the most part, during the beginning of my stage, my broad stroke stage, I'm just looping the whole track. I want to hear the whole track.
Interesting, Bryan. I know that Bryan That's really interesting. You know what? I'm gonna start applying that to my when I'm forced to mix songs. Bryan, I was gonna ask you. You know, I've been fortunate to sit in that room with you where you're currently calling us in from, and one of the things that I always noticed, I'm sure Tony's the same way, but you know, you set up templates for yourself so that, you know, when you get a record in, and I knew this also from when I was working with Chris with Algae earlier, or, you know, early in my career, you have these templates set up that you then sort of import the audio into, right, Bryan? And now,
Yes.
do you, and you have, do you have standard templates? So in other words, you don't start a mix when it's mix time, quote unquote, from the beginning. You have these templates set up. Can you tell us a little bit about the concept of creating those templates and what's in those templates?
I didn't hear the last part, but the concept for setting up the template isn't to get a sound, you know, molded to every song I put in it. It's really just about, you know, housekeeping, you know, where things go, routing, you know, bus routing, signal flow. I do have all my not all, but most of the inserts on my template have something on it, you know, an EQ that I like for that instrument group, or compressors I like for those types of guitars, what have you. But they're never active. The thing comes up, you know, unity gain, no plugins, no no processing. It's just there so that I always know where everything is. It just, you know, if you have a template, it's like working on a large format console, only with more variety in terms of what kind of EQ you can introduce. But it's really just being able to focus on music and not worry about, oh, I gotta bust this to here again. You know, just all that busy work is done. That's the concept of the templates. And the other thing is so that I can make stems really quickly that are all discrete. So, you know, it's complex. You know, every single instrument group has its own, you know, series of sends and returns, so that when I go to stem it out for the lucky person that got a sync placement in a Martin Scorsese movie, you know, and Martin says drop the vocal out, there's not vocal reverb left over on the guitars and what have you. You know, so it's all just
The bane of my existence. The bane of my existence is stemming. But it's necessary. It has to be done. And I want to talk about it quickly because I know that our chat is blowing up, and I want to jump into it. If you can, sort of like you sort of touched on it, the importance of stems. Maybe since Bryan, you brought it up, talk about, you know, what are stems, and then once you're done mixing a song, what are the stems?
So the stems are the individual instrument groups, kind of submixed on their own. So, gosh, for me, it's you know, 4 stems of drums: the kicks, the snares, the top kit, and the effects and rooms. Claps, percussion, loops, bass, lead vocals, wet and dry, background vocals, wet and dry. Electric guitars, solo instruments, acoustic guitars, keyboards, effects, which are noises, horns, and strings. Those are all the stems for me.
And the intention is that when you basically reassemble them, they sound like your mix.
Yeah, if I send you those stems and you put it up on your console at Unity Gain or your DAW, it should sound exactly like the mix, with the exception that there won't be any bus compression applied, which I don't use much of anyway. So it doesn't sound a whole lot different.
Well, you know, you're kind of segueing into my next question, which is the master bus, the elusive master bus. This is a conversation that I've had with other producers that I work with who try to sort of, you know, when we're not at a stage yet where we can hire you or Tony, we sort of have to be the de facto mix engineers. And so we have this master, what's on your master bus? It's sort of like this, you know, what's the secret sauce? And, you know, I've talked to other, you know, I've been very fortunate to work with you and almost every world-class mixer in your caliber. And you guys all have a different perspective on the master bus. You know, Bryan, I'll start with you since you brought it up. What's your perspective on the master bus?
So I have two gain stages for the master bus. You know, one of those stages is my normal, like what I would do as a mixer. And then if I'm competing, like in a shootout, or like you say, trying to impress a client and get a song cut or whatever, I have a second gain stage where I could put like mastering limiters on there to really get the volume up as transparently as possible. But I have like a console emulation, the SSL bus compressor, and an Ampex tape machine emulation. My mixes almost always go through those three things. And then afterwards, I have a variety of choices. I can put a smart equalizer on it, like the Guilfoss, or I can put a really nice expander limiter, like the ML4000 by McDSP. I love the L2 by FabFilter, just to give a little bit of more fullness in the middle of the mix, and kind of keep tabs on the transients so that I can get just a little bit more bigness, I guess you would say, in the mix. And then sometimes I use a multi-band compressor, like the Waves, multi-maximizer, I think it's called. I think it's called an L3 or something, or an LL3. And for something really that changes the sound, maybe the Summit, not Summit, but the Shadow Hills mastering.
That's what you really turned me on to.
That changes things so much, though. You got to be careful.
That's a powerful plugin. It sounds amazing. I want to bring it over to Tony on this one, because
Tony has the real hardware version of that. That's where I first saw it. Was at his studio. I said, "What the fuck is that?" Sorry for the language.
Tony, I mean, really quick.
That's my mastering compressor. I said, "Really? That's nice."
Yeah, I mean, Tony, I mean, you've managed to use both the real one and the plugin. I mean, do you feel they're interchangeable? Just really quick before we get into your master bus question, how close are they?
I don't. To get to my analog Shadow Hills, I've got to go through all my summing, so I can't compare apples to apples.
I got you.
And never have, actually, because I never feel that that's of much value.
So talk about the master bus and how that affects your mix overall. And are you mixing into it, or is that something you do after the fact? You know what I mean?
Yep.
Does it save your mix? In other words, does it sort of, you're like, oh my God, I know it's not doing this, I'm just going to slap something on the master bus, or do you mix into it?
I don't have one way. And I don't have one way because of you. Because you send me stuff and it's on your reference master, and I get your Pro Tools session, and you're
like, what is this guy 40 plugins on his master bus?
Some people have 40 things, some people have 4. But if I remove one, not all the time, and yours is not the case, but there are guys who are more songwriter than producer, and they're just trying to get their songs sold, and boy, they'll throw everything, including the kitchen sink, on that master bus, and I've got to really pay attention to what's happening there. Sometimes what I'll do is, if that's the case, I'll drag, say they've got a multi-band that's doing a heck of a lot on the mix bus, but in reality, it's messing with my vocal. I can't do nuanced vocal rides because that's on the mix bus. So I'll take that off the mix bus and put it on, maybe some instrument subgroups that I have, like a drum subgroup, a bass subgroup, things like that.
To create that space for yourself.
Creating space, exactly. And that gives me a little more breathing room on the mix bus so I can get some nuanced, vocal levels happening. I know nuance is not a word that's used.
No, now it's like, can you make it louder? It's
just louder is all. That's the only word.
It needs to be louder. It needs to be louder, but also warmer. And it needs to be more bass.
Right.
And I think, and we can get into it because I can talk about this all day. I really want to open up questions, but I think sometimes too, a big mistake that I certainly make is the correlation of things like this 808 to the vocal. People, they don't overlap really that much in terms of frequency, but they are so affected by each other, especially through the master bus. Wouldn't you say?
Oh yeah. Oh
Yeah.
yeah, I've heard vocals go down like this, every time an 808 hits, and nobody else is hearing it but me.
Yeah.
And that's when it gets real sketchy.
Yeah. You must be friends with all the dogs in the neighborhoods. Because you can hear all the frequencies. We and I love to continue doing this because I could just talk to you guys all day, but I'll be selfish and do it over breakfast. I see the chat window is absolutely blowing up. Zan, why don't you hit me with a question, and I'll here's my Canadian reference. I'll stick handle it to either Tony or Bryan.
Nice.
All right, this one's from Jake. How did you train your ears to go from amateur to world-class pro? What shifts, changes did you go through to hear the way that you hear, e.g. subtle frequency differences to mix bass, kick perfectly, etc.?
Either of you guys can take it. Bryan, you want to take this one first?
I don't know that that's a valid question for me. I never really felt like there was any sort of transition. I mean, I think Tony is in the same boat as me. We were kind of among the first of our generation where engineers became mixing engineers. Before around 1985 or so, there was one engineer. He recorded and mixed a project. And around the mid 80s, when a lot of dance remixes were being done, the term remixing and mixing sort of became a thing. And I was one of the engineers lucky enough to be called a mixing engineer because I loved mixing so much. And I don't really know that I went from being anything to anything else. Looking at me from the inside, maybe somebody from the outside could say what that moment was.
Well, I mean, before Tony answers, I'm going to jump in. I would think that probably there was a lot of self-criticism and a lot of listening and a lot of comparing to other records that were out that and sounds that you aspired to sort of chase. My guess, and sort of looking internally and going, why doesn't my thing sound like that? And then kind of like investigating the reasons and then sort of coming up with solutions. I
actually don't think I did that enough in my early days. That's something you should really do a lot of when you're mixing. Always listen to a reference track, even if it's the mix that they gave you for that song. That's just listen to a lot of stuff in your studio and listen to a lot of stuff while you're mixing, and it's kind of eye-opening. You go, oh, okay, I can do better. You'll hear
Tony?
it.
Bryan has a more natural ability than I do because he's a better musician. I actually spent a lot of time doing ear training, and I would spend time, writing notes about what's the instrumentation, what's the EQ on the vocal, what's the what equalizer are they using? What I would try to put the mix back together or the production back together in my head when I listened to music, and that helped me a lot come to some understanding. Obviously, I was probably not right. I was probably listening to a mix that Bryan did, or a mix that Chris Lord-Alge did, or Bob Clearmountain, or Neil Dorsman, or somebody like that, and writing down what I thought they were doing was probably not at all what they were doing, but it helped me understand, oh, okay, well, there's some room here that he slotted in a guitar, and then the keyboard just sits right slightly on top of that, and I would just put together a map in my head for ear training of what was done in the mix. Again, not at all knowing what was done. I think also because I assisted some good engineers, and I just sat in the back of the room, and in those days you couldn't leave the room. Even if all you did was go get coffee for people, you had to sit in the room while they just went over and over stuff. So I would just mix in my head. I would just sit there and write notes, or I would come up with ideas for the snare reverb, and just knowing the gear and practicing on the equipment, I would spend time, sort of melding my ear to a particular sound, so that I was able to create more of a nuanced understanding of the equipment. I wasn't a great musician, so putting music together was a little more difficult for me. So for me, it was always putting frequencies together.
Really, that's really, really interesting. Ear training for frequencies. I think that's really important. In fact, I use, and I maybe I'll share, because what we're going to do after is both Tony and Bryan have been so generous to provide some really cool plugin presets that they use every day. And we're going to put those together in a package for you guys and email them to you, along with some stuff that I use, and also a little sample pack, just so you guys can feel like you can get a little bit of a glimpse into their process. But I love the concept of ear training for frequency, Tony. That's amazing. And actually, what I was going to say was I have a really cool frequency chart that I'm going to also include there, because I know that some people, I don't know if you guys do it, but also you carve frequencies based on the key of the song. In order to do things like, have vocals sit better, or have 808 sit better. I know that that's a big part. We don't have to dig into that. But Zen, and I know there's millions more questions. Hit us.
Yep. With the fragmentation, this is from Jordy, sorry. With the fragmentation of the market with respect to devices, music is consumed on Bluetooth, speakers, earbuds, etc. Can I delegate the task of getting my mixes to sound good on various devices to the mastering phase and just work with a good mastering engineer to give them what they need in my mixing? Could I focus on listening to the mastering engineer to develop a good template to feed the mastering process with the raw material to let them figure out how to get a single mastered MP3 that works on all devices?
Whew, that's a good question. Tony, you want to start with that one?
Yeah, you've hit upon, when you're talking about what separates the men from the boys here, this is a big part of it. Whatever technique Bryan and I use, as different or similar as they might be, in the end, we can hear our mix, whether it's done or not, and know how that's going to work in a variety of listening environments. We also know, just by virtue of the amount of product that we've worked on, we know at what readiness it is for the mastering engineer.
Right.
And that's something that really comes with experience. I don't know how to answer it better than that. I think that
I also think it's trusting your mixes to relationships and mastering engineers that you like, that you know are going to return work that you love. Bryan, I mean, what are your thoughts on it?
I just like to address another part of his question, which is no, don't ever feel like you can leave anything to anyone. It's like we had a saying, oh, we'll fix it in the mix, or we'll fix it in mastering. And then and jokingly we would say, oh, we'll fix it in the stores, once it's out and pressed and like, so no, you always try to every step of the way make it excellent, and don't rely on mastering to fix anything. And
right.
That's just a different part of his question, I know. And listen to it on lots of different systems, as many as you can.
I just want to echo that. I think if you maintain the level of excellence that you trust, I've always looked at it like I can do a pretty good job. I look to guys like Tony and Bryan to elevate my work another 20%. And then I think that they look to take what their work has done and elevate that. I don't think that I personally don't like when it comes back totally different sounding. And it's really gut wrenching to hear shit mastering too. That ruins things a lot. Next question, Zan.
All right, this one's from Thomas. A lot of the time, people talk about how most digital plugins have their sweet spot when receiving at negative 18 decibels. Is there merit to this, and how do you approach gain staging and prepping tracks and stems when starting a mix?
Ooh, I'm so happy with that question. Can I answer it?
Yeah, go ahead. Professor Malouf, and I mean that literally because he's a professor at USC. Go ahead.
I always treat plugins that have been modeled after hardware gear as if they were the hardware gear. So the signal level has to be similar to what it would be if it was the box in the rack behind me. So you listen for the sweet spot. You can't overload the input of a compressor any more than you can, underutilize the gain structure at the input. And I don't do measurements. I don't think about minus 18. I do use meters, I look at meters and I look closely at them. But your ears tell you when you're hitting the sweet spot, nothing else.
Interesting.
You know, I just want to add, it's funny, Brian, you say that. I actually think about the positions of the knobs in the digital world similarly to their related analog equipment positions as well. And I clip gain my audio so that it works similarly.
Yeah.
And so that's
do that too.
Really, really interesting, guys. I appreciate that. Do you have any more questions, Ann?
Yeah, this one's from Stefan. How close to pro quality can I get to, assuming the core audio tracks are up to scratch, mixing at home on Logic?
I hate mixing in Logic, but knock yourself out. I've heard pretty amazing mixes come out of Logic. So yeah, absolutely.
You know, it's actually interesting. I had this question sort of kind of brewing in case we got stuck for a moment. So I'm going to just bring it up as a sort of an addendum to the question that Stefan just asked, which is, how do DAWs, different digital audio workstations, how do they differ from each other sonically? I know both of you guys are Pro Tools guys, but do you have any thoughts on that?
I haven't done enough A/B.
Right.
Because you've got to mix a song completely in a DAW before you can really make a decision. You can't just take a mix you've done in Tools and somehow apply it to.
But I'm sure that both of you guys have received songs that were produced in Logic or produced in Ableton or wherever that are then converted, and now you're importing stems into your Pro Tools session, which, by the way, personally, I just feel that Pro Tools sounds better. I don't know why. I just feel like it does. I feel like it's deeper. The algorithm is better for some reason. But what about chasing mixes that were done in Logic before they got to you, where you are now dealing with them in Pro Tools?
I would say the difference in DAWs is minuscule and not really. It's really about what you're comfortable working on.
Right. Interesting. So
fidelity wise, I don't think it's worth talking about.
Cool. Any other questions, Ann?
Yeah, this one's from Julia. What's the best ways to make vocals sit comfortably on the track?
You guys are both genius at this, so I'll let Tony start with this one.
There's no best way. There's lots of different ways depending on the content of the track and the production and the arrangement and and a lot of other things. But a trick that I use quite often is I will listen in mono and do rides in mono. And it sort of allows for things to be stacked up. I listen to one speaker in mono. And that kind of helps me hear, here's the kick, here's the snare, here's the vocal, here's there's obviously no left, right, but I can hear things sort of stacked up. And that helps me. That's one of the techniques I use. There's lots of things that go into it.
Yeah, I learned that early in my career, actually, is really finding the sweet spot by listening in mono. Bryan, what about you? I mean, I know that you'll probably agree with that conceptually, but let me add to this question. How loud do you mix?
It's funny that Tony's answer is absolutely right. I get vocals to sit well in a mix by listening really quietly, I think.
Right.
I don't know why that is, because you should be listening at a fairly healthy level so you can hear what's masking the vocal. So I do go back and forth between soft, medium, and loud, but is getting a vocal to sit nice I think is a lot to do with figuring out what's masking the important elements of it. And it goes back to Tony's original answer about how he listens to a mix, which is he's listening for what's going to push his buttons emotionally about the vocal. And what he's doing, even if he's not conscious of it, and what I guess we all do unconsciously, is we're unmasking that emotion. Sometimes you can look at it as unmasking frequencies, or letting ambience shine through, or being really intimate with a lack of ambience, but you're unmasking the emotion of it. tools wise, I almost always have a 1176 style compressor on a vocal, and I almost always have an SSL style channel strip.
I want to jump in and kind of rip off that question just for a moment here, and then I want to get back to it. And if you can sort of answer it as quickly as possible, what's the number one mistake people are making in their productions before they get to your your computer, before they get to your mix? What's the number one mistake you're getting, Tony? What do you have to save every time or commonly?
I'm lucky enough to say that the mistakes that make it to me are generally always gain structure related and
Right.
not necessarily
It's not like an over-compressed vocal that's coming to you suddenly, and then all of a sudden you have to fix it.
I didn't choose that one first because normally they give me both. So they'll
Right.
give me their version of what their reference mix was, and then they'll give me a version that's got nothing on it.
Right.
So I get to replicate as much of what they did as I want, but edit it.
I see.
But I think it's gain structure overall. That's the one that folks are, they'll have all the vocals have their own subgroups, the different sections, and then they'll have an all vocal aux, and then an all vocal master, and all tons of plugins on all of them, and bringing a group fader all the way down, and audio faders all the way up, and this whole idea of gain structure, and even within a DAW, signal to noise is different. So that's usually the issue that I have to deal with most.
Yeah,
There's
I
the
don't.
occasional producer recorded vocal, which is a jab at y'all. But you're both quite good at it. But producer recorded vocals, I always try to convince my clients and my friends to hire an engineer, and get a real engineer at least for the vocal.
It's funny you say that, because I don't actually use a lot of plugins. I actually think I make them sound worse. So I try to make sure that it sounds good going in, as close to good going in. So for me, when I'm mixing, most of it is balancing and sort of carving frequencies. Bryan, what do you feel like is a common mistake that you see on the way in?
I don't see too many mistakes anymore, honestly. The thing I spend time on in a restoration sense mostly is mouth noises and clicks and pops.
Yeah.
I'll give you guys all a little trick. If somebody's singing and they're making a lot of lip smacking noises, cut up an apple for them, have them eat it. And that takes care of a lot of that mouth clicking sound. And, just pay attention to clicks and pops when you're doing vocal comp. Sometimes I get a vocal comp in where I don't have all the sections, and if there's a click or pop in it, I have to use a restoration tool. And I don't hear it. I mean, people are so good now, Justin. I mean, productions are overwhelmingly good.
I resemble that remark. No, I'm kidding. I always love listening to you guys, because every time I hear a mix come back from either of you guys, I realize how out of tune my ear is to that part of my sort of skill set. And so I'm so grateful for you guys to clean up my garbage. Anyway, I know we have a few more questions here, so let's jump right into it.
All right, this one's from Somer. I tend to struggle with the balance between making a mix feel clean and professional while keeping the emotional quality, especially for darker tracks. What are some approaches you use when mixing to strike the balance? Do you aim for clarity first and then add back the darkness with certain reverbs, delays, micro delays, etc.? Any other tips for how to maintain the emotional aspect of a mix?
Taking a holistic approach to the mix is the only way I know how to do it. So, and again, this, Tony answered this on almost the first question. It's that, leaving everything up, letting the interplay between the instruments and vocals be your guide, I think is tantamount to success. I think that I tend to want things to be a little too good sounding when I feel like I've erred on the side of, being too good or being too good. When I say good, like high fidelity, or too raw, I err on the side of too hi-fi. But like on records like Everclear, when I made an effort to curb that enthusiasm on my part, I also got a really successful, raw, kind of terrible sounding record that resonated with people emotionally.
Yeah, I mean, I think Butch Vig probably was a great example of that on like Nevermind. I think you bring up a really good point.
Sounds incredibly good. I think it's a really good hi-fi sounding record.
I mean, I just think the point of what I'm saying is that I think as a lesson is that it's serving the song in the best way possible and helping tell that story. Because I want to get to more questions. We're just going to keep moving, and I'll aim this one at Tony. So, some more questions, Dan?
Yeah. As a songwriter who produces sorry, this one's for Matt. As a songwriter who produces to try to have a song land, but probably isn't producing the track, what key things would you focus on in the mix and master bus to succeed with a sellable demo of the song, but not spend hours on it?
I think there are a lot of tools now that you can use to get your level together, make sure that the level is similar to other material that you pay attention to. I think that's one. If you're trying to sell a song, that's certainly one to remember. And you can use a variety of the maximizers and limiters that are out there to help you do that. But also, I think I was just talking about this with a friend of mine yesterday. If you're creating a song, keep it focused. Some of the best pop songs and most successful pop songs have very little going on and make an amazing point. You don't need to pile on a ton of production to make it sound more expensive or more in line with what's happening in the successful pop world. Sometimes 5 things at any one time in a song make a great song.
Billie Eilish is a great example of that.
Exactly.
Minimal. I mean, even actually Selena. I mean, your Selena Gomez records. I mean, they're very, very minimal, aren't they?
Yeah.
I totally agree. And just what I was going to say is part of just to jump in, because as a producer, that oftentimes has to kind of be forced to produce to mix my own stuff. I'm actually going to include some of my own presets that I like. In fact, it was funny. The thing that Tony just mixed with me, his assistant called me and said, we can't find this preset, this setting that you used for your multipass. Can you send it to us? And it's just a little trick that I've sort of developed that I put on my drum bus that just all of a sudden makes those drums come a bit more alive. And I took it as a compliment that you wanted that setting because I kind of felt good about it. So just like little tricks like that, just things to sort of like bring your mix alive. I'm going to include some of those in the presets pack that you guys are going to get. Any more questions, Zan?
Yeah, this is from Daniel. Would you say the analog gear is way better than mixing in the box? Are there times where you actually prefer DSP over analog?
I mean, I know, Tony, you guys both have combinations of analog and plug-in gear. So, Tony, you want to start this one?
I use both, and I will oftentimes A/B. So sometimes I'll start a mix in the box, and then I'll say, oh, let me split it out and see how it works. And I'd say probably 75% of the time it opens up, and I get a little bit more headroom out of it, and a little bit more width and depth. Summing externally, but I also have hardware inserts, so I can put an analog compressor or EQ on any track. So I go back and forth based on just what's in my ear.
I'm a believer that since Pro Tools 64-bit mixer came out, that there's really plenty of sonic advantages to staying in the box. When I go outside into my analog gear, I kind of always print back, and I don't know if that's a popular opinion or not, but I'm not into analog summing mixers at all, and Tony, it doesn't matter really.
In my limited experience using it, I just felt like I had records that kind of felt good, and as soon as I summed it out, they just kind of unglued. And I don't know. That's because I don't know what I'm doing as a mixer.
I think for me, it's like I'm also really lazy, and I don't want to have to worry about settings because I'm going to 3 or 4 songs from different projects, sometimes in a day, and I just like the workflow to be as least complicated as possible, and it sounds fine.
I see, Tony, we have a compliment. The Waves Maserati group plugin in master mode is great on the master bus. You've received a compliment. Good job, Tony. Royalties. Do we have any other questions, Zan? Take a couple more.
Yeah. This from George. What are your opinions about AI mixing and mastering technology? What are the limitations? What are the benefits?
Well, you're talking to 2 purists, so I'm sure that they can go on and on about this one. Bryan, you have a thought? Tony?
Are you talking about like Master Assistant on Isotope, artificial intelligence, figuring out your curve and your gain and all that stuff?
Let's assume that that's what we mean. That's what he means.
I thought about that particular plugin when there was a question about what's the really easy way to put the finishing touches on a mix. I mean, that's probably the easiest thing to do if you're unsure of what you should do.
And by the way, it's free right now.
What?
You can get Isotope Elements for free right now at sweetwater.com.
Oh, well, I'm talking about the Isotope Ozone 9 as well.
Yeah, Ozone 9. Yeah.
But anyway, I don't much go for it, but I appreciate the technology. I think it's interesting.
Yeah, I'm not going to comment on it. I'm not.
I just get these guys being like, "Yes, automatically mix your songs."
I think that it's inevitable, but I'm confident that humans have a purpose that might vary in a more interesting way.
I think we have a couple, one more question, and then we're going to sort of sign off here. And you guys, George agrees, by the way. So good. Although I will say, part of what I'm going to put in my what I'll call my producer preset pack is some really cool stuff that I've managed to mess with with the Elements plugin that just kind of tightens things up nicely that I really quite like. So if they work for you, amazing. If they don't, then it's all good. But mine is definitely coming from a producer's perspective of how to mix a song and get it to a point. We'll take one more question, then we'll wrap this up because these guys are probably off mixing next year's Grammy songs as we speak. So let's try and
Tony is.
Let's try. Just remember us all in your Grammy speeches, you guys. Any more questions, Zan?
Yeah, this is a fun one that we're going to end on. Tony, what's it like working with Beyonce? Bryan, what about Michael Jackson?
Oh, you guys never ask those questions, I'm sure. I want Bryan to start because I think in some ways one doesn't exist without the other. So, Bryan.
With Michael during the time that I did, we started working together when about the second single from the Thriller album was released. So, I mean, sitting next.
That was it the big record?
Big record back in the day. Sitting next to that guy was electric. I mean, it was probably the second most exciting experience in my life. The first being sitting next to Stevie Wonder in the same sort of scenario. But wow. Michael was very confident. He was really hands-on. He was a writer. He helped with all the sounds. Like one of the stories I tell is when David Williams was playing those really nice, plucky, very muted tones on his guitar for that propellant guitar rhythm parts. Michael was there putting his finger on the bridge of the guitar to get just the right amount of muting that he wanted. I mean, that's how involved he was. And he loved it.
Well,
You know?
Well, I think that not to take anything away from Quincy Jones and his genius, but I think people don't really understand the level of absolute genius that Michael had, because he was doing demos almost exclusively a cappella, and then those were being interpreted as what became songs, right?
Bass line in one speaker, vocal in the other. That was enough for him.
Amazing. Well, and then of course there's this other artist I think is going to do really well named Beyonce. I feel good about her. And Tony actually is really interesting because you're sort of really in on the secret, because all of a sudden she'll drop a record and you're like, yeah, I know, I've been working on this for 2 months. Tell us about Beyonce, because I think that she is also a genius.
She is. I met her when she was 16, and she was already, the ideas in her head were difficult for me. And at that time, I'd been in the business for 15 years or more. She was hard to keep up with. She doesn't have formal training, but is always thinking about not only the song, the emotion, the impact, but she's also thinking of the show. How is this going to play? Or if I extend this, what's that going to be in my show? So, the depth of her creativity was always dramatic for me. And she's the kind of person who, when I recorded her, I remember one particular moment of me making a mistake in the recording. I don't know, who knows what I did, and needed her to redo something. And I mean, she didn't blink. She just, did it exactly the same. Her control of her instrument was so perfect. It is so perfect that she can do anything she hears in her head.
I want to add one more question, because I've actually always felt like she's so visionary in her direction creatively. And in other words, I don't really want to lean on this, more so on like the EXO and like that sort of whole era, because I feel like that's where she made a really major transition, where it felt like she just went light years ahead of the curve on people, and just on things like but specifically, one of the things that always amazed me was on a song like on Single Ladies. You have this like tremendously atonal song. There's almost no key to this song. It's entirely rhythmic. The melody has nothing to do with any tonal reference whatsoever, even if there is there, and yet it's so flawlessly integrated. When you're listening to those records, are you just like, what am I listening to? I mean, like, you must feel like you're a part of, kind of like you, Bryan, when you were working with Mike, you just must feel like you're a part of a sea change in the way that in the direction pop music is about to go. Am I overstating that?
No. That's how you feel when you're doing it. The hard part is getting your emotion and your knowledge to all work within that framework that she's put together for me.
Right.
I'm sure with Michael it's the same.
You just have to sort of hold on and just trust in the genius that you're fortunate to be within the atmosphere of.
Yeah, find that thread, right? Okay. And sometimes you'd be surprised. Sometimes for her, just not hearing the reverb correctly, shakes her up enough that she can't really focus. If the kick drum is incorrect, or simple little things will distract her beyond, the scope of the whole thing.
I want to leave you guys with one question here, and either of you guys can answer it first. It's not important. The question I have is, what was the song that you worked on before it became just like what was the song that you listened to and worked on that affected you before you were sort of, when you were in on this little secret? Like, what was the song you heard and you were like, oh my God, this is going to change everything? What was that first moment for you, Tony?
Well, that's a hard one. I would probably say that I've had several. I mean, the Lemonade record and the Beyonce record before that as well were just milestones in pop culture history. But the early Mary J. stuff, it was something that nobody had done to that point, and so those records were
Probably that era, that Biggie, Mary J. Blige era, right? Yeah. Amazing. Bryan, what was the little secret that you felt like you were a part of that you just looking back now?
Well, I can tell you, sort of on the humor side, two of the records that I mixed were numbers 1 and 2 in the worst records of all time, according to Spin Magazine.
Nice.
Quite an honor.
It was such an honor for me, and they both changed my life in great ways. One was We Built This City on Rock and Roll by Jefferson Starship, and the other was Everybody Have Fun Tonight by Wang Chung. Number 1 and 2 worst records of all time. I got them both, pal.
Classic. Nice. Classic. You know what? I would put that right on the top of your bio if I were you.
I should. You're right.
Guys, we could go on all day, and for some of the people that have asked questions that we didn't get to, we actually are taking these down, so we're going to try and get these back to you. Look out for your emails and to getting some of our little tools here to use and apply them to your own mixes. Next week, we have another incredible webinar with some amazing all-stars. We're calling it The Secret Sauce, The Secrets Behind Music Supervision. We have Keir Lehman, who is responsible for things like Lego Movie, Insecure, Entourage, and about a million other things. He's going to be joining us. And also, I think probably both of our friends, Jeremy Summers, who is EVP at Fox Television. So he does things like Empire, and every single song that you hear watching any Fox drama, he is the guy. So they're going to share their tips and insights on how to on how to get their attention. It's going to be a really interesting webinar. So please look out for your emails and sign up for that one. And of course, MDIIO.com. It wasn't really necessary to talk about it, but we're really trying to connect people and give you guys a tool to use. And I just really wanted to thank again Tony and Bryan. You guys are dear friends, and I really appreciate you doing this. And if you are not using Tony's plugins, you are a terrible human being. And if you're not attending Bryan's incredible insights at USC, then obviously you don't want to make it in this business. So I really, really appreciate the time that you spent, you guys, and I appreciate you guys logging in. And of course, you guys know, go to MDIIO.com, sign up for free, use it, upload your songs. We are constantly updating it with opportunities to place your music, and reach out to me, jgray@MDIIO.com, and I'll do my very best to get back to you guys. Just one more quick thought. We are getting overwhelmed with submissions for feedback, so just please be patient. We're getting those back to you as soon as we can. So you guys are awesome. I feel blessed. I want to thank my partner in MDIIO, Curtis Cerna, Scott, who you are not even realizing exists, but he is the person that has been sending you and communicating, making sure that you all are organized and getting onto these webinars. I want to thank Scott and, of course, Zan for doing a tremendous job moderating and fielding all of these questions. My name's Justin. Thanks so much, guys. Bryan, Tony, thank you very, very much. I'm sure that Tony's mixing a new Beyonce record that we'll all listen to very shortly. So have a great day, everybody. Take care, be safe, and have a great weekend. Thanks,
bye,
guys.
Everybody. Bye. Take care.
Take care.